Howdy, friends. This is Baxter Black. This is a tape about wrecks. Horse wrecks, cow wrecks, financial wrecks, sheep wrecks, dog wrecks, philosophical wrecks, truck wrecks, Tyrannosaurus, well, maybe not that, but any kind of wreck that stands as a pothole in the cowboy's trail to glamour and respect. Now, I've become, for lack of a better description, a cowboy poet. And it's not a bad job, really. It's a little hard to get a loan, but most cowboy poetry is funny, or mine is anyway. I try and make it that way. And I think that has to do with a close relationship between humor and tragedy. See, if you're in the livestock business in any way, shape, or form, you get hurt a lot. I mean, you get bit and kicked and smashed and stepped on and humiliated in the most awful fashion. And the only way to handle this pain, I think, is to laugh about it. Say you're in the corral and one of your friends gets bucked off. Well, everybody rides over there real quick to make sure he's all right. And if he's alive, you start telling the story right away. And if he's dead, you wait a couple of days. Well, I want to start this out with a poem that's a typical wreck. But it helps in this poem if you can speak a little French. Coup de grace. Are you with me? For you Anglophiles, that is spelled co-op de grace. Now, I have a hobby, and it doesn't say a whole lot about one's intelligence if you have a hobby that eats. I like to team rope. Now, last summer, one of my roping friends hurt his leg. His name was Ron, and we didn't see old Ron for 2 or 3 weeks, and then one day he shows up right in the middle of the rope, and we've already run 2 sets of steers through, and we see him coming out of the trailer and coming through the gate, and he gets on his horse, don't warm him up or nothing, just backs right into the header's box and shakes out of the loop and kind of grits his teeth, and I fall over there into the heeler's box, and I get ready, boy, and he nods his head fiercely, and that steer comes a-bailing out of the box, and Ron's right behind him, boy, and he's a-shaking out a loop and spinning her big, and that steer's a-running down the arena fast, and it's a long arena. I mean, I get off, water my horse, get back in the race, and by the time we get clear down to the end of the arena where that steer turns in that little alley where they peel the ropes off, Ron finally throws his loop. Well, the steer goes that way. The horse goes the other way, and Ron comes right out over the top and hits a brand new humming tight net wire fence. And he kind of slithers to the bottom there in a little pile. So, of course, we go riding up there to see if he's all right. We said, Ron, are you okay? Well, at least it isn't broken, he said as he wiped his face with his good arm. Although it might be a smidgen out of place. That sucker sure did buck hard. I'm glad I was wearing my hat, or I'd have punched right through that net wire fence and hung there like a bat. Dadgummit, where's the rest of my shirt? All but the sleeves are gone, and my chest has got a pattern you could make a waffle on. I remember him a-squalling with my collar in his teeth as I flopped from neck to shoulder like a rubber Christmas wreath. Have you seen my other bat-wing leg? I had it, I'd have sworn. I never wear just half a pair. Must have hooked it on the horn when he ran it up my pant leg, where my inseam used to be. And my off hind boot is missing. Oh, hell, that don't bother me. Could still be in the stirrup, 'cause I had a dead man's grip. I made several revolutions from his belly to his hip. Checked the bow sal and the back cinch as I orbited around. He pumped me like a plumber plunging dirty water down, and then bounced me off the bucking rolls when he went to changing gears. I did a backflip and catapulted out between his ears, but I hung tight to the neck rein as I spun and ricocheted like someone tied a chicken to a helicopter blade. I was airborne several minutes before I landed in a heap, and, excepting for this hat band, there ain't nothing left to keep. Can't remember if he kicked me, but these tracks are living proof This here trademark on my pocket looks suspiciously like hoof. Don't know how the sucker bucked me off. It happened way too fast. But nobody has to tell this fool that I've been coup de grace. It's a story old as cowboys, and sometimes the horses win. But at least it isn't broken, so best catch him up again. There's a little ghost town in the Flint Hills of Kansas called Heimer. It used to be a rail stop, and later the cowboys used it when they were driving cattle north to Abilene. Well, I only bring this up since the town of Heimer is mentioned in this next poem. So when you hear it, you can say, oh, yeah, Heimer, a little ghost town in the Flint Hills of Kansas. There are strange tales told in the days of old when cowboys tested their luck. But the queerest portrayal of life on the trail was when Dunny ran off with a duck. The boys and I were driving steers up north and stopped at Heimer.
Yeah.
Right.
You know Heimer.
Yes,
To rest the bunch and have some lunch and just restoke our primer. We tied our horses to the fence, commenced to tellin' whoppers, and thus inclined, we watched a line of ducks come huntin' hoppers. Those ducks fell in behind our steeds and sorted through their droppings. It's a duck thing, I guess. For bits of grass or oats they'd passed, like barnyard fowl out shopping. Young Orville hefted up a duck, which kind of starts this caper. Behind unfazed, old Dunny raised his tail to break a vapor. Why people do the things they do remains a constant wonder. Like Orville there, saw tail midair and stuck the duck up under. To say it took his breath away would sure describe old Dunny. And just as true, I reckon, too, that duck was breathing funny, 'cause underneath old Dunny's tail 2 wings protruded oddly and filled the air with flying hair. The racket was ungodly. You talk about a hissy fit. Both fur and fowl got ruffled. Above the din, the duck chimed in, although his quack was muffled. Well, old Dunny reared and broke his reins. The other horses bolted and ran askew while feathers flew like Pegasus had molted. I saw him top a distant hill, headed home in earnest, like somewhere back he'd been attacked by a drunken taxidermist. Well, young Orville took his chewing square, but we finally all deduced by Josephine we'd never seen one ducked instead of goosed. And what about the duck, you ask? Well, he didn't stay for dinner, so I don't doubt he stuck it out, or in, and rode on south for winter. I met Gerald at the Intertribal Ag Council in Tulsa. He was a Southern Shoshone and was the ranch foreman for a tribal reservation there in Nevada. He told me this story and said it'd make a pretty good poem. Well, he was right. Gerald Two Bears was the foreman of the tribal branding crew. Lots of Indians who were cowboys came to do what they could do. Billy Strike was good at roping, and his medicine was strong, and he roped 'em automatic, till misfortune came along, 'cause he roped a good-sized heifer calf, but he roped her round the neck. She ran behind his horse's butt, and put 'em both in check. That rope slid underneath his tail, which spooked the pony some. So, of course, he went to pitching, 'cause the nylon chafed his bum. Now, like I said, that Billy's tough. and wouldn't quit his dally. That rope was holding him down tight, made every peak and valley. His horse was snorting up the dirt like he was sweeping mines, and kicking himself sideways like a spring when it unwinds. Billy blew his left-hand stirrup, so he leaned against the tide, but his saddle got some cockeyed, sleeping off the other side. His dally peeled off the horn. His anchor chain had broke. Billy flew like Humpty Dumpty and came down and broke his yoke. Gerald Two Bears ran to Billy, who lay still upon the ground. He said, "Billy, are you all right?" Billy didn't make a sound. He listened for his breathing, but he lay so awfully still. He said, "Billy, can you hear me?" Then, with superhuman will, Billy's eyelid raised, his eyeball turned, and swiveled toward the source. Gerald leaned up close and whispered, "Billy, can I have your horse?" Anybody who trades horses knows it ain't always as easy as it looks. Tom Ed's a good boy, but missing a screw where the clutch fits into the saw, everything runs, but the blade never turns. Tom Ed is my brother-in-law. I took a bad horse to the auction barn. Tom Ed came along for the ride. That horse had a mean reputation, and I figured they'd sure skin my hide, but I got to thinking, they're not so smart, them traders that buy every day. I'd teach 'em a lesson once in their life. Pretty soon, I'd worked out a way. Now listen, Tom Ed, I've got us a plan for clipping them horse traders' wings. You be the ringer and bid the price up. You get half, whatever he brings. Malay led my horse out into the ring. Tom Ed brought the bidding along. Not bad for a kid whose table was set one salad fork short of a prong. The auctioneer sang like a telegraph wire. 3 bidders were locked in a heat. I sneaked me a peek to check out Tom Ed, but Numbskull was not in his seat. "Don't quit me, boys," the auctioneer droned. "Now who'll give me $4.25? Our plan was on track, but just me was left to keep the bidding alive. $4.25, a half, now a half." I nodded. "Now 50, he said. "Bid 5, I got 5, a half, and now 6. Just look how he carries his head. 7, bid 7. I stayed in the race, spurred on by the whip and the slash. I could smell a fat hog. Dollar signs rang. I was already counting the cash. "Now 50. I nodded. He bumped me up. 800, I bid. Then I stopped. He'd owned that sucker at $8.25 as soon as the gavel was dropped. "Now $8.25, the auctioneer cried. "Quarter, last chance to get on. Ain't nobody in for $8.25. Go in once, go in twice. Going, gone, sold to the bidder who just ate his hat." I was up and hunting Tom Ed. He was grabbing a bite in the cafe. He grinned. "We did it," he said. "I started him out and then went to the John. Came back just in time for the hit. One bidder stalled, but the other hung tough. I run that fool up, and then I quit. You're a genius, bro. We sure schooled that bunch. Them traders were sitting ducks. We stuck that old crowbait up somebody's nose, and you owe me $400. Somebody once told me, having you help is like having 2 good men not show up. Nitwits are partial to wisdom that's usually corny and trite. But the worst part of nitwit wisdom is when the nitwit is right. I was riding pasture for Brimhall, checking for bad eyes and such. He'd hired this nitwit to help me. He never did like me much. "You can't be good at everything," said Nitwit, missing the steer. Well, I had to agree that he wasn't. Good, that is. That much was clear. I chased the steer and caught his horns. I dallied, and then I spoke. "You rope the hocks, and we'll stretch him out." He tried, but it was a joke. "Here, set my horse and hold the head." We swapped, and I roped the hind. "Now take back your horse and hold the heels, and don't let no slack in your twine." I got off to doctor the steer and fished for my last syringe when a hoof lashed out and cracked my hand, doubled my arm like a hinge. Just stabbed myself with a needle. He kicked me under the chin and then rolled me off over backwards, driving the needle on in. "Don't let go of your dally." Damn! His rope was flopping around. The steer stepped out of the heel loop and headed for higher ground. "You sorry excuse for nothing? You lion-bred drizzling dope! I guess you see he's still dragging my brand-new 40-foot rope. You're dumber'n boiled gravel. I told you keep your slack tight. Now he'll probably die of pneumonia." We watched him flee out of sight. "Well, look on the bright side," said Nitwit, his wisdom cut to the quick. "The way that old steer quit the country, he couldn't have been that sick." Sometimes a cowboy can get waylaid. When that happens, you're lucky if you're riding a horse that knows the way home. The light shined through the swinging doors and spilled itself out onto the street. It stubbed its toe on a shadow and fell at the cowboy's feet, who was part inebriated. Well, really, substantially blitzed. He listed to port and swayed like his momentum was on the fritz. He scanned the customer parking in search of his faithful old bay. Lo and behold, there was his horse, but facing the bass-ackwards way. "Great Scott! My equine's been damaged, tampered with," the cowboy said, and then reached the brilliant conclusion that somebody'd cut off his head. He rode Old Bay back to the ranch without even taking a breath, with his finger in the windpipe to keep him from bleeding to death. How many of y'all believe in reincarnation? Nice to see you again. Have you heard of those folks who claim to have died and then have come back to life? They speak of a glimpse of a heavenly place, far from the world and its strife. The stories they tell have a common thread. To a man they all contend they found themselves in a long, dark tunnel with a light way down at the other end. Now, as you might surmise, there are skeptics that think it's mostly hot air. But I can confirm they're not blowing smoke. 'Cause, friends, I know. I was there. I was entered up in the fall rodeo and drawed a bull named Big Red. And just when I had him, he bucked me clean off. I lit right square on my head. I hit the ground like a bag of loose salt. Knocked me plumb out, so they said. Little stars twinkled around in my brain. For all I knew, I was dead. I righted myself, or thought I was righted. I could have been upside down, but there I was, in that long, dark tunnel. And I marveled at what I found, because down at the end, just like they had said, a light materialized. I squinted my eyeballs and studied that light. It was then I realized my collar encircled my head like a wreath. At last, it finally made sense. I was peeking out through a buttonhole, so I crawled back up on the fence. Like a lot of us, Thurman used to rodeo. He had heroes just like all of us did that inspired us. They filled us with the love of the sport, and with their experience they were able to show us that we were part of a grand tradition that included the likes of the Linders and Picketts, the Lindermans, the Tibbs, Olivers, Mahans, Fergusons, Johnsons, and Coopers, all the way to the Murrays of today. Thurman's mentor was Lucille. Two Jumps said he used to ride bulls. In spite of his name, he tried. He had grit, determination, and bravado on his side. Unfortunately, he lacked skill. He was naturally inept, and as life laid down her cow pies, that's precisely where he stepped. But even a hard-luck cowboy is entitled to one guru whose faith in him is undaunted, whose loyalty stays true blue. Now all of the young bronc stompers and bull riders knew Lucille, a rodeo clown and hero to all who strapped on the steel. Lucille knew the bulls and broncs and always offered advice on rodeo, on love and life, on learning to sacrifice. It was over the chutes at Knoxville when Two Jumps heard the phrase that would stay with him forever, long after those heady days. Lucille was walking toward him, no doubt to wish him well. Two Jumps cut eyes at his partners to make sure they all could tell it was him Lucille had chosen to pass along for this ride the words he was meant to live by. He fairly bursted with pride. Two Jumps was pulling his bull rope, the rosin starting to smoke, when Lucille looked over the chute gate, squinted his eyes, and then he spoke. "Two Jumps," Lucille confided, "to really make yourself proud, there ain't no way you can ride this bull, so hang up and thrill the crowd." I had an ambition when I was a kid. I wanted to become a rodeo star. I used to ride bulls till my brains came in. Unfortunately, I wasn't very good at it. But I had a friend named Charlie Ingalls on the New Mexico State rodeo team, and boy, he could ride a bull. And I used to say to him, Charlie, why can't I ride bulls like that?" Actually, it was more like this. "Charlie, why can't I ride bulls like that?" He said, "Bax, you've got to practice." I said, "What? Practice riding bulls? Does that make any sense to anyone in here?" "Well, I'm going to have a train wreck tomorrow. I better have one today to practice." So I gave up riding bulls, and I've now taken up the gentleman's sport of team roping. And I'm no better at that than I was riding bulls. But it doesn't make any difference. I just love to do it. And I was trying to explain team roping to a cousin of mine from West Virginia. I said, team roping, there's a steer in the middle, and there's a header on this side and a heeler on this side, and a header backs up in the box like this, gets the old reins pulled back pretty tight, shakes out a little loop like that, boy, grits her teeth, and boy, nods her head fiercely, and that steer comes bailing out of the box, and she comes riding to him like that, boy, Bill Noop ropes him round the horns, goes the dally, goes this way. The heeler swoops around, catches both hocks with one rope like that, goes the dally, go this way. They turn and face each other and snug the steer gently between them. And my cousin said, well, how do you tell the difference? I said, of what? Well, she said, the header and the heeler. Well, I said, the header's on this side, no one rides out like this and ropes the horns, going to heeler. No, she said, when they're just standing there. And it occurred to me that you can tell the difference when they're just standing there. You can go to any rodeo or roping, you get all the team ropers, line them up against the fence, put their hand behind their back, and you can almost go down and pick the headers from the heelers. So I did a little survey. I canvassed the PRC XWA, Pro Rodeo Cowboys Ex-Wives Association, It's a large group, by the way. And the Team Ropers Anonymous Halfway House. And I've come up with some guidelines that might be useful to y'all if you're ever put in the position of having to distinguish. But for my demonstration, I need to borrow a baseball cap of some kind. But anybody got one they would just lend me? I can't see out there too good, so anybody wearing a baseball cap? Ah, good hat. The Georgetown Hoyas. Ah, and just my size. 3 holes. Thank you, sir. Ah, perfect. How to distinguish a header from a heeler? The header usually has his hair styled rather than cut.
Baxter is now demonstrating the healer's cap, worn backwards, of course.
We're number 1. The healer cuts his own hair. Always needs a shave. The header drives a fairly new pickup and trailer with a coordinated paint job. The healer, he's still buying recaps, you know. And the paint job on his trailer matches the primer on his brother's barbecue grill. The header usually has 2 horses, his favorite and one in training. The healer, he's got 1 horse in training and for sale. The header will discuss the lineage of his horse. He's out of an easy-jet mare, full cousin to Stick. The healer will discuss the lineage of his tack. I used to ride broncs in this saddle. Association tree. Just bolted this horn on and wrapped it with duct tape. Bruce Ford gave me this holster. The header has ulcers. The healer has a hangover. And when it's all over and they're back behind the chutes, discussing endlessly why they lost, I think whining is the verb. The header, bless his good and noble heart, he'll blame himself, or his horse, or his rope, or his wrap, or his loop, or his dally, or his timing, or his technique, or the wind, or the steer, overtraining. The healer, he blames the header. Thank you. All right. Thank you for the hat. Here's a little Christmas poem that's, well, less than traditional. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and Rudolph was lame. The vet from the North Pole said, "Foot rot's to blame. I'll give him some sulfa. It's the best I can do, but stall rest is needed the next week or 2. "Great Scott!" cried old Santy. He turned with a jerk. "I won't get through Pier if my headlight don't work. On Interstate 40 I'll surely get fined and lost in Montana if I'm flying blind. No cop in his right mind would give any clout to a geezer who claimed that his reindeer went out." So he gathered the others, old Donner and Blitzen. Were there any among 'em whose nose was transmitsin'? They grunted and strained and sure made a mess. But no noses glowed brightly or ears luminesced. It's bad luck in bunches, cried Sandy, distressed. We'll fly Continental, the Red Eye Express. I'll just check the schedule. He put on his glasses, when up stepped old Billy, the goat from Lampasas. He shivered and shook like a mouse on the ark, but his horns were a beacon. They glowed in the dark. Sandy went crazy. He asked, "Why?" with a smile. "I just ate a watch with a radium dial. Where I come from in Texas, we don't have thick hide. My skin is so thin it shines through from inside." "If that's true, then let's feed him," cried Sandy with glee. "Gather everything burning and bring it to me." So Billy ate flash bulbs and solar collectors, electrical eels and road sign reflectors, firecracker sparklers, a lady chick shaver, and lifesavers, all of 'em wintergreen flavor, and jelly from phosphorescent fish, day glow pizza in a glittering dish, fireflies and candles and stuff that ignites, then had him a big bowl of northering lights. He danced on the rug and petted the cat. And after he'd finished and done all of that, to store up the static electricity better, they forced him to eat 2 balloons and a sweater. Then he opened his mouth. Light fell on the floor, like the fridge light comes on when you open the door. His Halloween smile couldn't be better drawn when he burped accidentally. His high beams kicked on. "Hitch him up!" cried old Sandy, and they went on their way. And I remember that Christmas to this very day. The sky was ablaze with the stars shining bright. They were shooting and falling all through the night. And I realize now, though my fingers are crossed, what I really was seeing was old Billy's exhaust. Strangers driving through the wide open spaces of the West might get the impression that nobody lives here. But ranching country has neighborhoods just like housing developments in the suburbs do. It's just that your neighbors live farther away. And instead of living at Elm Street and 10th Avenue, your address might be the second mailbox past Gold Creek. Turn east and go 4.5 miles. Look for the cow skull hanging on the cattle guard gate. A source of pride amongst cowboys is knowing the lay of the land. And any poor fool that gets lost, they figure ain't much of a hand. They said, "We'll meet up at Bull Creek," and then looked at me like a trainee. "Well, draw me a map and I'll find it. Columbus had nothing on me." Well, daylight broke into my windshield, headed south and loaded for Bear. I turned at the Grassmere station. I should have shot myself right there, 'cause nothing was like they described it. No mailbox where it should be, no coyote hide on a fence post. Now where's Mary's Creek supposed to be? Their map showed tourist attractions, including, I swear, Noah's Ark. Little old Tricklin' Sheep Creek was wider than Yellowstone Park. I crossed the Cow and the Horse Creek, and creeks named for nickels and dimes, through Knit Creek, Louse Creek, and Crab Creek, crossed Willer Creek 28 times. I drove demented and crazy, a-chasing my tail like a dog, coursing through desert and mountain, brush thicket and cattail bog, fighting back panic. I'm thinking, I could die and never be found. Worse yet, I'll look like a gunsel who can't find his way out of town. Well, Harold was boss of the truckers, and I figured he might set me right, so I called him up on the two-way and explained my desperate plight. He said, "Describe your surroundings." I looked for a landmark somewhere. "Ain't nothing but rocks and sagebrush." He said, "Sonny, you're almost there." Back when I was doing ranch work for a living, if we weaned a set of steers off the desert or the mountain that weighed 400 pounds, we was pretty proud. Well, today, 500 pounds or more is a lot more common. This gain in weaning weights is the result of improved genetics and selection and better management on our part. Used to, when a cow calved, we'd pretty much just leave her alone. Let the cow take care of everything herself. But nowadays, we keep a close eye on the heavy bunch and rush out to vaccinate the newborn against the scours and tag him so we can monitor his progress and his genetics. Well, in spite of all this high-tech intensive care, we still involve cowboy types in the equation. And when you do that, disaster waits just around the corner. For instance, what happened to your pickup seat? Is that buffalo track? Well, I guess you had to be there. We had a cow attack. It all began when me and Roy went out to check the cows. We'd finished lunch and watched our soap and forced ourselves to rouse. We was poking through the heavy bunch for calves to tag and check. I spotted one, but his old mom was bowing up her neck. She pawed the ground and swung her head, a-slinging froth and spit, and then bellered like a wounded bull. Say, Roy, I said, let's quit. But Roy was bent on tagging him and thought to make a grab. Just drive up there beside the calf. I'll pull him in the cab. Oh, great. Another stroke of genius, of cowboy daring-do. Sure enough, when Roy nabbed the calf, his mama came in too. And I do mean climbed up in there, got a foot behind the seat, punched a horn right through the windshield, and she wasn't very neat. She was blowing stuff out both ends till the cab was slick and green. It was on the floor and on the roof and on the calf vaccine. If you've been inside a dryer at the local laundromat with a bear and 50 horseshoes, then you'll notice where I was at. At one point, she was sitting up, just going for a ride. But then she tore the gun rack down, and the calf jumped out my side. I was fighting with the door lock that she'd smashed to passing by when she peeked up through the steering wheel and looked me in the eye. We escaped like paratroopers. Out the window, landed clear. But the cow just kept on driving, 'cause the truck was still in gear. She topped a hump and disappeared, and the blinker light came on. But if she turned, I just can't say. By then the truck was gone. I looked at Roy. My truck's a wreck. My coveralls are soaked. I'll probably never hear again. I think my elbow's broke. And look at you. You're pitiful, all crumpled up and stiff, like you been eat by wild dogs and pooped over a cliff. But think about it, Roy said. Since Grandpa was alive, I believe that that's the firstest time I've seen a cattle drive. It was a fairly nice day in Cutbank in early April. A little breeze blowing off the reservation, the sun about the color of skim milk, and the creek starting to show the runoff. Well, that afternoon, Myron had spotted one of his cows with a calving problem. Only one foot was showing. He brought her up to his covered preg-checking shed where he'd installed a new WW head catch. Since his wife had taken a scouring calf into the vet's, he called a neighbor for help. Well, Florence said she'd be right over. When she arrived, Myron eased the old cow into the crowding pen and started her down the long alley towards the head catch. Florence stood by on the catwalk to lend a hand. For the sake of you dyed-in-the-wool Powder River folks, I think I should explain the WW head catch. Think of it as French doors or barroom doors that swing in and swing out, except that the doors weigh over 100 pounds each and are made of steel and pipe. Well, to set the head catch, you swing the doors in, then the cow comes in, and you hit the lever, and it locks straight across. And then when you want to let them go, you hit that lever again, and the gate swings the opposite direction, plumb out, so the cow can go out. Well, halfway down the alley, this old cow went down, And those y'all know who've had cow down in the alley, no amount of tail twisting or bad language can get this cow to go if she don't want to go. So Myron asked Florence to run down there and get a bucket, and he had an OB chain and a couple OB handles. And he had one chain, and this chain was 32 inches long. Well, Myron got down in there behind the cow, and he dropped one loop at the end of that chain around that foot that was sticking out, and he took the other end of the chain, made a loop, and put it over his wrist. No, I know you think you've heard this story, but believe me, you haven't. Well, Myron went inside the cow and he palpated, and sure enough, he found this other foot, and it was just sort of peeking up over the brim of the pelvis, and he grabbed it and he sort of popped it, and it popped right up into the birth canal. I mean, there they are, both sticking out. Well, the cow is so relieved, she stands straight up, and the only daylight she can see, of course, is straight down the alley, right through that WW head catch that Florence had set wide open, facing in. Well, the cow takes off like a bullet, boy, and she's a-racing down that alley, and Florence is right beside her up on that catwalk, and I mean, they are running neck and neck. You talk about a horse race, and Myron is exactly 32 inches behind them. Well, I mean, we're talking about a photo finish, and just as that cow shot through that gate, Florence dove off the end of the catwalk. Well, the cow, I guess you could say the cow was ahead by a tail, because when Florence hit that lever, that gate closed flat across right behind that cow. And just as it clanged shut, Myron hit it head on and rang the bell. Well, the whole procession screeched to a halt. Florence, in panic, of course, hit the latch, and the head catch blew open. Myron was jerked forward and rear-ended the back of the cow. She doubled over and kicked him right where it hurt, laid him flat out, and she took off around that corral, dragging Myron like a Sidewinder missile locked onto her bow. And around she went, dragging him through the straw and the mud and the ice and the muck. And Myron was wearing his good calving pants that day. They're an old pair of wool pants he really liked, but they're awful big. And as she drug him around, he began to pack this chunks of manure and mud and straw down into these pants, to the point where it finally pulled his pants down around his ankles. Well, the cow drugged to a stop and idled momentarily, and Myron managed to slip the chain off his wrist. He plopped in the flop and lay like a plow left in the furrow. Well, the cow jumped the fence and calved unaided 15 minutes later, and Myron was treated for abrasions on his oil pan, and now wears a 16.5, 34, 36 shirt. We often hear about the bond between man and animal, but they're always talking about dogs and cats. Well, maybe not cats, but there is a bond between livestock people and the animals in their care, and it took me a long time to realize it. I got a lot of mileage out of picking on cowmen for keeping some old cull for one more year. See, as the vet, I was hired to give advice on the health and prospects of the cows the rancher would run through the chute every fall. Typical deal. I'd be standing there at the back of the chute, cowman standing at the head, and this old cow come shuffling in, close the head gate, never touch the cow, drag a stick along her side, old tail head sticking up like a shark's fin, she's standing on one tit. And I'm thinking, is there really any point in me putting on a plastic sleeve and going into this cow? And I look up there at the head gate, and standing there, rubbing his chin like he was standing in front of a jewelry counter, is this cowman. And he's going, I don't know. And I ask myself, am I missing something here? But what I finally learned, and it took me a long time to learn it, I'm ashamed to say, was that cowman and me were not looking at the same animal. See, I'm looking at an economic unit. Decide whether this animal is going to pay for itself when she comes back in or runs out for another year. And this cowman is looking at an animal that has taken him to the pay window for for the last 10 years. Or he might even know her better than that. She might have put him over the fence, or he might have helped her calve. But the fact is, he knows this animal, and he respects her. And he wants to make sure she has every chance. And with that being said, about the bond between man and animal, there are cows that are exceptions to this rule. We run this old cow in the squeeze chute. She rattled and fought all the way, and then rammed a hind foot through the side bars and managed to cow kick Jose. He dropped the syringe he was holding. It stuck in the toe of his boot. At least now he's protected from lepto. He gave her the gringo salute. She wedged a big horn in the head gate and dang near flipped onto her side, and it occurred to me, not for the first time, how nicer she'd be chicken fried. She thrashed and created a shambles, everything not battened down. She moved the whole chute off its footing, knocked poor Jose to the ground. We finally somehow got her captured and squeezed with her head sticking out. My job was to check on her dentures. I carefully reached for the snout. She buried her nose to the hubcaps and watched with her little pig eye till my body leaned into the strike zone, and then she swung her head like a scythe. "He's old," I yelled as she grazed my ribs. "Well, hell, you never looked," said the boss. "Well, check her yourself," I shot back right quick. "Could be my eyeballs were crossed." The vet plunged himself to the armpit in search of a pregnancy there. I prayed every year she'd be open. If God would just answer my prayer. "She's bred!" came the cry from the backside. Like always, I drew the short straw. It looked like another long winter with Darth Vader's mother-in-law. Jose and I watched her departing. We'd spent quite a while with this bunch and knew that old cow for a hoodoo. The dang sure would eat a man's lunch. She'd climb up your rope like a viper, make a man hunt a new job, and any poor fool that dismounted could wind up on her shish kebab. She might grab the lead when you're trailing, or maybe just brush up and hide, but she'd take a horse in the willers, so you'd best be ready to ride. I reminded Jose how we'd saved her. That time she got stuck in the bog, I lost a good rope in the process, and she wallered Jose like a hog. "You nearly got drowned, amigo." "Ay, verdad, muy mala that cow. If fuera for lift her for the lobos, my foot, she wouldn't have hurt him now." The boss was surveying the wreckage. "I think this here tailgate is broke. Say, Jose, did she get all her shots?" Jose eyed the boss. Then he spoke. She's missing the one she's most needing. La puerca's too much with her tricks." "You mean," asked the boss, "vitamin A?" "Oh, no, senor. 30-06. Pete was invited to put on a working stock dog demonstration at the agricultural fair in the nearby town of Purdue, Saskatchewan. He could have brought his own lambs that were dog-wise, but his hosts offered to furnish the sheep so he wouldn't have to bring them. Well, on arrival in Purdue that morning, they drove out to the fairgrounds, and out in the middle of this huge gravel parking lot was a trailer. Well, they drove up to it, and Pete peeked into the back of this dark trailer at the sheep. 6 big, black-headed Suffolk ewes glared back at him. It was like looking into a cave full of bank examiners. Well, he stationed his wife, Pam, and his dog, Jock, at the back, and opened the tailgate. Well, the U's charged in a flying wedge and bowled over the defense. They made straight for the show barn and then turned at the last second for a windbreak of Willers. Well, Jock was on 'em, boys, snapping at their noses, and in the melee, an abscess broke on one of the U's. The U's holed up in the windbreak, all save one, who started down the highway for town. Pete sent Jock away to me to fetch her back. Well, the two met 3 times on the center line before that old U turned back for the bunch. She arrived with a bloody snoot and led the others down the road in the opposite direction. Well, assuming control, Pete, Pam, and Jock aimed for the intersection leading back into the fairgrounds. It was fenced on both sides except for one driveway that led to a nice country home set back on a beautifully landscaped lawn. The U's, of course, took a hard right and made for the house. As the flock rounded the corner of the house, Pete caught a glimpse of a well-dressed lady peeking through the curtain. They made 12 passes around the house, trampling the shrubs and the lawn and the manicured flower beds, and mangled 4 bicycles, knocked over 6 flower pots before panting to a slippery stop on the front porch, which now looked like the bottom of a dumpster. The enraged homeowner opened the door to register her displeasure. The lead U broke for the living room. Well, Pete followed, slamming the door behind him. They raced over sofas, coffee tables, potted plants under the kitchen table, through the hall, and back to the living room, where the U paused to squat on the shag carpet, beige, of course, in front of the television set. Well, Pete caught a hind leg and dragged her across the rug to the door, and just as he raised his hand to say, "No, don't," the helpful homeowner jerked open the door, admitting U number 2. Well, in small towns like Purdue, news travels fast, and it was standing room only for the working stock dog demonstration that afternoon. When I have occasion to be at somebody's ranch for a few days working cows, I often stay in the bunkhouse. Now, I learned that when men live together in close confinement, they get possessive of their little area. Matter of fact, I think every evening they go around their bedpost marking the territory. But you learn quick never to mess with another guy's stuff. You respect their privacy and tolerate their bad habits, though it ain't always easy. Old Duff slept in the bunkhouse in the corner by the wall. Nobody slept beside him. It was self-defense, that's all, 'cause Duffy was a chorus of expulsions in his sleep that sounded like a freight train going through a band of sheep. His sinuses would vibrate till the quilt slid off his bed. His snores would roar unmuffled like a chainsaw in your head. His hiccups crashed like cannons firing off the starboard bow. He'd hack and cough and whistle like you'd stuck a bloated cow. The window panes would rattle. The barometer would drop. Our covers started flapping. The wood stove blew its top. And amidst this raucous tumult, we could hear him changing gears. He'd belch like bullfrogs rutting. Then a new sound filled our ears. Big bubbles started forming deep within his swollen paunch and rolled through him unhindered like torpedoes toward the launch. We'd lay in apprehension as we listened to the din in dread of what was coming when the final guns kicked in. Well, the new kid was a rookie, and because the bunks were tight, we had him put his bedroll next to Duffy for the night. He drifted off uneasy, what with Duffy's serenade, but when the cookie crumbled, his whole bedroll came unmade. St. Elmo's fire went dancing. Radiation filled the room. A whoosh blew out the lantern. I heard a sonic boom. An eerie echo rumbled. I thought I saw a flash. The kid sat up, electrified, his face as white as ash. "What was that?" I heard him cry. "I think I'm paralyzed. I must be going crazy. I see stars before my eyes. Nope, you ain't going crazy, but the world's turned inside out, 'cause Duffy's last contortion blew the roof right off the house. How many of y'all have ever been embarrassed? Guess I could stop there, couldn't I? Yes. How many of y'all have ever been embarrassed by your good dog? Yeah, me either. I got a good dog. He's an Australian Shepherd, got one blue eye. He loves me. I believe I love him. Go with you anywhere, you know. He don't care if you're in a pickup or a horseback or foot. He don't care. He just wants to go. You know when I say to him, "You want to go?" He don't say, "Where are you going?" Going by the video store. No, he don't care. He just wants to go, right? And did you ever notice when you leave and come back, it don't make any difference if you've been gone for 5 minutes or 5 days, your dog is so glad to see you. I mean, isn't that something? Can you think of a single human being that is that glad to see you? Yeah, you run out to the pickup to go to town, you forget the keys, you run back in the house, the dog licks your hand, and your spouse says, "I thought you left." Now, I got a neighbor, a good neighbor, and a good neighbor when you live on the outskirts is somebody who lives just the right distance away, right? I mean, close enough to circle the wagons, but far enough away we can have that privacy that I guess some of us value. I believe those are Kansas plates, Mother. Now, my neighbor's got a job in town, bless her heart. She gets home every evening about 5:15, and she lives by herself, and I see her always usually a few minutes after she gets home. She comes out into the backyard wearing her coveralls. Yes. And in her backyard, she has got a long line of rabbit hutches. And she spends, what is to me, an inordinate amount of time messing with them rabbits. Talking to them.
Hi there. How are you? Would you like a little carrot? Yeah. Here you are.
Singing them little rabbit songs. Now I'm sitting out on the porch one afternoon, rocking away. Yeah. I got a porch swing. Yeah. Some of y'all been there, you know that. Yeah. Yeah. It's about 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm done working. Yeah. I've already thought up something. Yeah, I'm just rocking away, and I look out there in the driveway, and there is my good dog. And he has got, whoa. And you know how you can tell from a distance it ain't a jackrabbit. They aren't black and white. Don't have them little floppy ears. And he has got this rabbit, and he is going whop, 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 whop. There's grabbing bark and branches and dirt flying all over everywhere. I jump up and run over and say, "Give me that rabbit." Hey, give me the rest of him. Whoa! Go get in the pickup. Ah! This rabbit looked bad. Looked like he'd caught on fire and somebody put him out with a weed eater. I looked over at my neighbor's house. She wasn't home yet. And so I slipped into the bathroom there at the house and I run the tub full of warm water and tested it with my elbow. And then I got some of my wife's good shampoo. She gets it at Holiday Inn. It ain't that big a deal, you know. Then I suds him up real good like that and hold him on the warm rinse water. Then I suds him up again, hold him on the warm rinse water. And then I get some of my daughter's mousse and mouse that sucker. Made him sticky. You could hang him on the tile. Peel him off like Velcro. And then I run him upstairs to the laundry and I put him in the dryer. Whoop-ah, 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 whoop-ah. Little booger come out and looked like an electrocuted porcupine. And so I took this little rabbit and I kind of sneaked over to my neighbor's house. And sure enough, the last rabbit hutch on the end was cocked open and it was empty. And so I took this little rabbit and I folded him. Into a rabbit position. Put a smile on his lips. All three of them. Give him a little Copenhagen, lean him up against the wire. Then I went back over to the house and sat down. Commenced to rocking. About 5:15, I seen my neighbor drive up. Yeah. Pretty soon she come out the back door wearing her coveys. Yeah. Started down that long line of rabbit hutches. Talking to them rabbits.
Hi there. How you? Want a little lettuce? Here, get this.
Don't you bite me, you little bastard. Singing them little rabbit songs. Do 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 do. All of a sudden, I heard her scream. Eek, eek. Well, it was far away. That's one thing I can't do very well, ladies. You could help me. All of a sudden, I heard her scream. Yay, I run over there, being the good neighbor that I was. I said, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she said, my rabbit. And I looked in there. And the little duffer had fell over. It didn't look good. And so I reached in there and I picked him up and I stroked him gently and I said, well, ma'am, I believe he is dead. I was a veterinarian, I could tell that. She said, yes, but what bothers me is I buried him 3 days ago.